Why did no one look twice when she stepped off the transport? The tires hissed as they cooled, releasing a breath of heat into the thin mountain air. Gravel shifted under heavy boots. The gate to Black Ridge stood open, unmanned, as if the base itself had decided she wasn't worth the formality of being noticed. People arrived here every week. People broke here every day. She stepped down last. No escort, no shouted name, just a woman with a single duffel bag slung over her shoulder and a uniform so unremarkable it felt deliberate. No unit patch, no ribbons, no visible rank. Her hair was pulled back tight into a practical knot, not styled, not defiant, contained, controlled. A few recruits leaned against the fence nearby, waiting for instructions. Their eyes flicked toward her, curious for half a second. Then the corners of their mouths lifted. Smirks passed quietly between them like a shared joke. She felt it. The dismissal, the silent verdict. She kept walking anyway. Black Ridge smelled like rust and old sweat. Not the sharp scent of effort, but the stale kind. The kind that lingered in places where people stayed too long under pressure. Barracks squatted low against the gray sky, identical and stripped of personality. Even the flags hanging near headquarters looked tired, snapping weakly in the wind. This place didn't inspire pride. It tested endurance. Her boots hit the ground in an even rhythm as she crossed the yard toward intake. Not rushed, not hesitant. Each step measured as if she already knew the distance by heart. Someone laughed behind her. Someone else whispered something crude. She didn't turn. At the intake desk, a man leaned back in his chair like he owned the air around him. Sergeant Knox Halden. The nameplate was polished. The eyes beneath it were bored and sharp. He chewed on a toothpick and looked her up and down slowly, deliberately, like inventory he'd already decided was defective. "Name," he said. "Aveline Crossmore." He flipped open the file. Then flipped again. His brows knit together. He tapped the thin folder against the desk and snorted. "This it," he said, holding it up between two fingers. "This all you brought with you?" She said nothing. Knox grinned wider, sensing weakness where there was only restraint. No service history, no commendations, no record worth a damn. He leaned forward. "You some kind of administrative mistake, or did you think this was summer camp?" A few recruits nearby chuckled. The sound carried. She met his eyes calmly, not challenging, not submissive. "I'm here to train, Sergeant." Something about the way she said it, flat, unadorned, irritated him. He slammed the file shut. "Yeah, we'll see how long that lasts." He pointed toward the barracks without looking. "End bunk, near the latrine. If you're smart, you'll quit before you embarrass yourself." She nodded once and turned away. The barracks door creaked when she pushed it open. The smell inside was worse. Damp concrete, old boots, resentment baked into the walls. Conversation slowed as heads turned. Eyes followed her to the far corner, where a rusted bunk frame waited like a punishment. Someone had already been busy. The mattress lay overturned, soaked through with stagnant water from a tipped bucket. Her locker door hung crooked, hinges bent, contents scattered and stepped on. It was the kind of cruelty designed to provoke a reaction. Tears, anger, a complaint. She gave them none. Aveline set her duffel down carefully on the wet floor and began working. She stripped the mattress without comment, wrung out the sheets with steady hands, laid them aside to dry. Her movements were efficient, almost mechanical, as if this was not new. A few of the women nearby watched closely, waiting for the moment she'd break. It never came. That night she slept on bare metal springs. No blanket, no pillow. When reveille sounded before dawn, she was already awake, sitting upright, boots laced, uniform pressed with an exactness that made others uncomfortable. At breakfast, the message was clearer. Her tray received a ladle of gray slop that barely held together. Everyone else got eggs, toast, steam rising. A recruit stuck his boot into the aisle just as she passed. She stepped over it without breaking stride. Another shoulder checked her hard from behind. The tray hit the floor. Food splattered across her boots. The mess hall went quiet for one long second. "Clean it up," an officer barked from his table, "and you don't get seconds." She knelt and wiped the floor with napkins while laughter rolled back in. Her stomach stayed empty. Her face stayed unreadable. By midday, the heat pressed down hard enough to blur the horizon. Recruits lined up in the yard for their first drill. Aveline stood at the end of the row, posture straight but relaxed, eyes forward. "You smell like you don't belong here," someone muttered beside her. She didn't answer. Major Ethan Crowell strode out with a clipboard tucked under his arm, polished boots, sharp jaw. The kind of man who believed authority was something you demonstrated by breaking others in public. He stopped in front of her. "No rank, no history," he said, flipping through her empty file. "You a ghost or just trash they couldn't place?" "I'm here to train, sir." That again, calm, controlled. He scoffed. "You'll be gone by the end of the week." During the obstacle course, they made sure she went first. A high-pressure hose roared to life just as she hit the cargo net. The water slammed into her face with brutal force, stealing breath, numbing fingers. The ropes went slick instantly. "Climb," someone shouted. She wrapped her legs, locked her core, and climbed blind through the deluge. At the top, lungs burning, she swung over and dropped into the mud below. "Missed a foothold," Crowell yelled. "Disqualified again." She ran it again. And again. By the third time, her muscles shook with fatigue she refused to acknowledge. When she crossed the line, she didn't collapse. She stood, because collapsing would have given them something. Later, during inspection, her gear was kicked apart. Her radio accidentally dropped. A demerit scribbled, an impossible time limit imposed. She carried the extra ammunition crates without a sound. Blood soaked into her collar where the straps cut deep. That night, when 4 recruits crept toward her bunk with soap wrapped in towels, they expected sleep. They found stillness. She was upright before the first swing landed. One wrist caught, one precise twist. A body dropped without a cry. She didn't strike, she didn't threaten. She looked at the others in the dark. They backed away, shaken, not by violence but by control. The next day, her mail was burned in front of the platoon. She didn't react. When a younger recruit was dragged forward and ordered to be struck, she refused. "I will not strike a teammate." That was when the smiles turned sharp. "This isn't art school," Knox sneered, grabbing a loose strand of her hair. "We don't do pretty here." Someone shouted, "Shave it." The clippers hummed before she was even ordered to sit. She did so on her own. Hands folded, spine straight. As the first lock fell, something shifted inside her. Not pain, not shame, but recognition. This moment, this test. She had seen it before, in other forms, in other places where cruelty masqueraded as strength. Rain began to fall as the last strip was shaved away. Cold, sudden, biting against her bare scalp. She stood in it without flinching. A monument to their certainty. And none of them noticed the way she cataloged every face. Every voice. Every failure. Not yet. Why did the rain feel heavier once the clippers stopped? It wasn't just the cold. It was the silence that followed, the kind that presses inward, waiting to see what breaks first. Water slid down her bare scalp in thin streams, tracing paths along her temples, dripping from her chin to the dirt below. Around her, recruits shifted their weight, boots scraping. A few hugged themselves for warmth beneath issued ponchos. No one offered her one. She stood exactly where they left her. Minutes passed, then more. Sergeant Knox and Major Crowell spoke in low voices a short distance away, their laughter punctuating the downpour. They weren't in a hurry. This wasn't about efficiency. It was about exposure, letting the lesson soak in. Aveline's shoulders ached, not sharply, dully, persistently. The kind of ache that came from strain layered on strain. Her collar stuck to her skin where dried blood had mixed with rainwater. She cataloged the sensation and filed it away the same way she always did. Pain acknowledged, not indulged. Her thoughts drifted despite herself. She remembered a different rain years ago hammering the roof of a half-collapsed building overseas. The sound had been so loud it drowned out gunfire. She'd been younger then, not softer but less familiar with disappointment. A voice crackled in her ear, calm even as everything else fell apart. Hold, breathe, wait. She had waited. She always did. Move it, Knox barked suddenly, breaking the spell. Formation's done. The recruits scattered toward the barracks, eager to escape the cold and the sight of her. Aveline turned with the rest, boots sinking into mud, head high, back straight. Someone laughed behind her. Someone else muttered, "She doesn't even look human now." She didn't react. Inside the barracks, the atmosphere had shifted. The earlier hostility had thinned into something quieter. Unease, curiosity. A few people glanced at her shaved head and looked away quickly, like they'd been caught staring at a wound. She reached her bunk and sat down carefully, wiping water from her face with the back of her hand. The metal frame was colder than before. Her damp sheets hadn't dried. She didn't bother trying again. Across the room, a woman with bleached hair watched her for a long moment before speaking. "You okay?" The question wasn't kind, it wasn't cruel either, just uncertain. Aveline met her eyes. "I'm fine." It wasn't a lie, it just wasn't the whole truth. That night sleep came in fragments, not from fear fatigue. Her body demanded rest in short, stolen intervals. Each time she drifted off, she surfaced again at the slightest sound, footsteps in the hall, a cough, a locker slamming shut. Old habits, hard to kill. Before dawn, she rose and slipped outside. The yard was empty, washed clean by the storm. Low clouds hung heavy, swallowing the mountains. She stood still for a moment, letting the cold bite, grounding herself. Then she began to move. Push-ups slow, controlled, no wasted motion. Sit-ups, planks, stretching joints that protested quietly. She ran laps along the perimeter, breath fogging the air, boots thudding a steady rhythm into the dirt. She didn't sprint. She paced herself. Endurance had always mattered more than speed. When reveille sounded, she was already back at her bunk, uniform changed, expression neutral. The instructors noticed. They always did. The next few days blurred together in a grind of deliberate pressure. She was singled out for every undesirable task: latrine duty, extra runs, carrying equipment meant for two. Her name was used as shorthand for failure. "Don't be a Crossmore." "Pick it up, Crossmore." Guess who slowed us down again? Each time she absorbed it, not because it didn't hurt, but because reacting would have fed them. Her inner conflict grew quieter and heavier at the same time. There was a voice inside her that wanted to speak, to correct them, to end it with a word or a look. Another voice reminded her why she was here, why silence mattered, why patience was the sharper weapon. During a tactical planning exercise, she was assigned to a group that didn't want her. They spoke over her, dismissed her suggestions without listening. When their plan fell apart under scrutiny, Crowell tore into them, and then turned to her. "You just going to sit there and let them fail?" She met his gaze evenly. "They didn't ask for input, sir." A ripple of laughter moved through the room. Crowell leaned closer. "Sounds like an excuse. Sounds like reality." For a split second, something flickered in his eyes, surprise, then irritation. "Run it again," he snapped, "all of you." Later, one of the recruits cornered her near the water station, a tall man with nervous hands and a voice that cracked when he spoke. "Why don't you fight back?" She studied him for a moment. His fear wasn't malicious, just young. "Because that's what they want," she said finally. He frowned. "So what do you want?" She hesitated. Not because she didn't know, but because saying it out loud felt dangerous. I want to see who they really are. That night, Knox pushed harder. He intercepted another letter. Read parts of it aloud, mispronouncing names, mocking tone. He didn't know what it meant to her. Couldn't have. The paper trembled slightly in his hand as he burned it, not from respect but from carelessness. She watched the ash drift away. Inside, something tightened. Not anger, grief, brief and sharp, she let it pass. The next morning, during weapons training, her rifle jammed. Once, twice. By the third malfunction, the smirks had started. "Must be user error," Crowell said over the loudspeaker. "Some people just aren't built for this." She dropped to one knee and worked the bolt with practiced speed. Her fingers moved without conscious thought, muscle memory older than the base itself. The workaround came to her instinctively, not from training, but from experience. She fired, hit. Cleared, fired again, hit. Each shot deliberate, measured, no wasted motion. When the system shut down early and her score vanished from the board, she didn't protest. She set the rifle down gently and stepped back. That restraint unsettled them more than any outburst would have. The wound on her forearm came later that day, a jagged edge she'd warned about earlier. Blood flowed freely, warm against cold skin. She reported it by the book. The medic barely looked up. "You're fine." She stitched it herself behind the latrine, teeth clenched not from pain, but from the absurdity of it all. The needle went in clean. The knot held. She returned to formation on time. When Crowell ordered her to strike Jenkins, a boy who barely weighed enough to carry his own pack, something inside her shifted. This wasn't a test of strength. It was a test of obedience. "I won't," she said quietly. The wind carried the words farther than she expected. Crowell's face hardened. Knox grinned. That was when the crowd turned. Not all of them, but enough. The clippers came out again in jokes and gestures. The laughter grew louder, uglier. The line between discipline and cruelty dissolved completely. Aveline stepped forward before they could push her. Sat down. Folded her hands. She felt the rain return, as if summoned by the moment itself. When it was over, she stood bald and soaked and alone, and strangely calm. Because now she knew. They had failed. They just didn't know it yet. And somewhere beyond the clouds, the clock was already running. Why did the air change the moment the engines rolled in? It was subtle at first, a low vibration through the ground, barely enough to notice unless you were listening for it. Aveline felt it before she heard it, a distant hum that didn't belong to Black Ridge. The yard had been settling into its usual evening rhythm, murmured complaints, boots scuffing toward the barracks, instructors barking half-hearted orders. Then the sound grew louder, tires on gravel, not rushed, not hesitant. Deliberate. She was still standing in formation, rainwater dripping from her sleeves, scalp cold and exposed, when the jeep crossed the perimeter line. The headlights cut through the gray dusk like a blade. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even Sergeant Knox straightened instinctively, wiping his hands on his fatigues. Aveline didn't move. She didn't need to see the insignia to know what this was. Command didn't come to Black Ridge without reason. They sent people away from here quietly. When someone came in person, it meant something had already gone wrong. The vehicle stopped. An aide stepped out first, young, tense, eyes already scanning. Then the general followed, Roland Vexley. His name carried weight the way mountains did, not loud but impossible to ignore. Medals rested heavy on his chest, clinking softly as he walked. "What's this?" he demanded, pointing with a gloved hand. Knox snapped a salute so fast it looked rehearsed. "New transfer, sir. Discipline issue." Vexley's gaze slid past him and landed on Aveline. It lingered, not with interest, but with recognition he didn't yet understand. Something about the way she stood, the stillness, the absence of fear. Insubordination, the general asked. Crowell stepped in eagerly. Refused a direct order, sir. Weak morale, poor fit for the unit. Aveline heard every word. She didn't argue, she didn't explain. She waited. Vexley gestured for the file. Crowell handed over the thin folder with a smug tilt of his chin. The general flipped it open. Then paused. His brow furrowed. He turned the page. There was nothing there, but the nothing was wrong, too clean, too intentional. Who authorized this transfer? Vexley asked. Crowell shrugged. Came through standard channels. The general's jaw tightened. He looked at Aveline again. Recruit, speak. She raised her chin slightly. Transferred for evaluation, sir. The aide stiffened. There it was, that word, evaluation. Vexley's hand drifted toward the tablet clipped to his belt. The aide moved faster, fingers shaking as he unlocked it. He glanced at Aveline's neck and went pale. A faint scar caught the fatting light, old, precise. He swallowed hard. The tablet chirped softly as clearance keys began to unlock. Red text bloomed across the screen. Omega-level authorization. The general inhaled sharply. Stop, he barked, his voice cracking across the yard like a whip. Stop everything. Knox froze mid-sentence. Crowell's smile vanished. Vexley took a step toward Aveline, eyes wide now, not with anger but horror. You idiots, he said quietly, then louder. You just humiliated your superior officer. Silence slammed down. Knox laughed weakly. Sir, she's a nobody. Vexley turned the tablet outward. Colonel Aveline Crossmore, Strategic Operations Oversight. Crowell staggered back a step. The aide handed Aveline a sealed envelope. She opened it with steady hands and removed a folded patch. The insignia caught the light briefly before disappearing into her palm. She rose from her kneel. Slowly. Not to intimidate, to be seen. Knox's face drained of color. His mouth opened, closed. Vexley scrolled further. You failed her drills, her weapons test, her ethics assessment. He looked at Crowell with disbelief. Do you recognize the tactical doctrine you've been enforcing here? Crowell shook his head mutely. She authored it, the general said, 15 years ago. The clipboard slipped from Crowell's fingers. Aveline stepped forward. She stopped in front of Knox and studied his rank insignia for a long moment, not with hatred, with disappointment. Rank is earned, she said softly. She tore the patch from his collar and let it fall into the mud. Knox sagged. MPs moved in. Handcuffs clicked shut. Crowell tried to speak. No one listened. Screens around the yard flickered to life. Footage rolled. Every insult, every act, every failure of leadership recorded and time-stamped. Recruits watched themselves laugh and look away. Aveline turned to them last. She said nothing. She didn't need to. As the officers were led away, the base seemed smaller, quieter, stripped bare. She touched her scalp once, feeling the rain wash the last of the hair away. Command is yours, Vexley said, saluting. She returned it. I didn't come for respect, she said. I came to see who deserved it. And in the stillness that followed, every person there understood the weight of what they had mistaken for weakness. Why did the silence after the arrests feel heavier than the shouting ever had? The yard did erupt. There were no cheers, no gasps loud enough to break the stillness. Just the soft clink of handcuffs, the scrape of boots, the low idle of engines carrying disgrace away from Black Ridge. When the vehicles disappeared beyond the gate, the base felt hollowed out, like something rotten had finally been cut free, leaving a wound that didn't know yet whether it would heal. Aveline stood where the formation had dissolved, rain still falling in a fine mist. Her scalp burned from cold exposure now that the adrenaline was gone. She welcomed it. Pain was honest. It didn't lie or posture or pretend to be discipline. The recruits didn't know where to look. Some stared at the ground. Others watched her as if she might vanish if they blinked. A few looked afraid, not of punishment but of themselves, of what they had laughed at, what they had allowed. General Vexley spoke briefly, issuing immediate suspensions, sealing offices, freezing accounts. His voice was clipped, procedural. He didn't apologize. He didn't need to. This wasn't about soothing feelings. It was about restoring truth. Then he left, and command quietly fell to her. Aveline didn't call everyone back into formation. She didn't bark orders or demand attention. She walked, slowly, across the yard, past the muddy patch where her hair still clung in wet strands, past the stool they had dragged out for her humiliation. No one stopped her. She entered the barracks without ceremony. The room stiffened as if a current had passed through it. Conversations died. Someone stood too quickly and knocked over a chair. Another froze halfway through lacing boots. Aveline took in the space like a surveyor. The rusted bunks, the cracked lockers, the damp corner where they'd soaked her mattress, every detail noted, not for revenge, for understanding. She stopped at her bunk. The bare metal spring stared back at her. For the first time since arriving, something inside her tightened, not with anger but with exhaustion. A deep, bone-level weariness that came from carrying restraint for too long. She sat down carefully, hands resting on her thighs, and closed her eyes for just a moment. She thought of the letter that had burned, of the voice it carried, of promises that had outlived the people who made them. When she opened her eyes, a young woman stood a few feet away. Bleached hair, tattoo at her wrist, the same one who'd mocked her smell days earlier. "I'm sorry," the woman said, her voice shook. "I didn't think." Aveline raised a hand gently. "Stop," she said, not unkindly, not harshly. The woman swallowed hard. Tears welled uninvited. Aveline stood. "Thinking isn't the hard part," she said quietly. "Doing better is." She moved past her without another word. Outside, word spread fast, faster than rumor, faster than fear. By evening, everyone knew Knox was finished. Crowell too, not transferred, not reassigned, finished. And that knowledge did something strange. It didn't make people brave. It made them honest. The next morning, Aveline addressed the base for the first time. No stage, no raised platform. She stood on the ground with them, bald head uncovered, uniform unadorned except for what was necessary. "I'm not here to be liked," she said. Her voice didn't carry far, but no one strained to hear it. "I'm not here to be feared." A pause. "I'm here to see who you become when no one's watching." She didn't threaten them. She didn't promise redemption. She laid out new expectations, clear, measured, fair. No collective punishment. No humiliation as training. No orders designed to break ethics instead of building judgment. Some nodded, some didn't. That was fine. Change didn't require approval, only consistency. The days that followed were uncomfortable. Old habits died hard. Instructors hesitated before shouting. Recruits waited for the cruelty that didn't come. When mistakes were made, they were corrected, not paraded. Aveline walked the grounds constantly, silent, observant. She stopped to ask questions that had no obvious right answer. She watched who spoke up and who stayed quiet. She noticed Jenkins first. The underweight recruit stood straighter now, not stronger but steadier. During drills, he faltered, recovered, asked for help when he needed it. When someone laughed, another shut it down. Progress slow, fragile. At night, alone in her temporary office, Aveline allowed herself to feel the cost. The adrenaline had burned away. The control relaxed just enough for memories to surface uninvited. Faces, names, the weight of decisions made under fire, the ones she stood by, the ones that haunted her. She ran a hand over her bare scalp, feeling the unevenness where clippers had rushed. A reminder she didn't erase. She kept it that way. One evening, she stood outside as the sun dipped behind the mountains, sky painted in muted orange and gray. A recruit approached hesitantly. "Ma'am," he said. She turned. "Why didn't you stop them earlier?" he asked. "You could have." She studied him for a long moment. His question wasn't accusatory, it was searching. "Because power reveals more than it restrains," she said. "I needed to see what people chose when they thought there were no consequences." He nodded slowly, not fully understanding, not yet. Weeks passed. The base changed. Not dramatically, not perfectly, but measurably. Reports improved, injuries decreased, dropout rates stabilized, and something quieter happened too. People began correcting each other when authority wasn't around. That mattered more. On her last morning at Black Ridge, Aveline packed the same duffel bag she'd arrived with. No extra weight, no souvenirs. The recruits assembled without being ordered, not to salute, to watch. She stood before them one last time. "You won't remember me for long," she said. "That's fine. A beat. But you'll remember how you treat the person everyone else ignores." She turned and walked toward the transport. As it pulled away, the base receded into the distance, smaller now, less monstrous. She touched her scalp once more, eyes forward. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did leaving feel harder than staying ever had? The transport's tires hummed against the road, a steady sound that should have meant relief. Distance. Closure. Aveline sat alone in the back, duffel at her feet, hands resting loosely on her knees. Outside the window, Black Ridge shrank into the folds of the mountains, its gray lines blurring into the landscape. She didn't look away until it vanished completely. Only then did she exhale. Not the sharp breath of survival, something slower, heavier. She had told them they wouldn't remember her for long. That part was true. Bases like that swallowed stories the way they swallowed people. But memory wasn't what lingered inside her now. It was the weight of observation, of seeing again how easily ordinary people learn to look away. The driver didn't speak. He knew better. When the transport stopped hours later, it wasn't at headquarters, not yet. She stepped down into a quieter facility, administrative, nondescript. The kind of place where walls held more secrets than weapons. Inside, a temporary office waited, clean, neutral, a chair, a desk, a sealed file with her name on it. She didn't open it right away. She stood by the window instead, watching the sky darken. The reflection showed her shaved head clearly now. No rain, no mud, just skin and bone and eyes that had seen too much. For the first time since arriving at Black Ridge, she felt something crack, not outwardly but inside. A thin fracture of doubt. Had she waited too long? The question was dangerous. It crept in softly, wearing reason like a disguise. She knew the logic, the necessity. Evaluation required exposure. Systems revealed themselves under stress. Still, she thought of Jenkins, of the woman with the tattoo, of the ones who'd laughed because laughing was easier than standing alone. Could she have spared them some of that weight? Aveline closed her eyes. There were no perfect answers, only choices and consequences. She opened the file. Inside were reports, hers and others, redacted names, psychological assessments, video stills, recommendations already moving through channels faster than she could track. Careers would end quietly. Some would be salvaged, a few would never recover. She signed where needed, not with satisfaction, with responsibility. That night, sleep didn't come easily. Dreams slid in anyway. A different base, a different time. She was younger there, hair tucked under a helmet, voice steady as she relayed coordinates while chaos roared around her. She remembered the moment the transmission went dead, the moment silence replaced confirmation. She woke with her heart pounding. Morning brought a briefing she hadn't expected. A small room, fewer people, faces she recognized from past operations. Men and women who didn't waste words or curiosity. They nodded when she entered. No one commented on her hair. The mission director spoke first. Black Ridge wasn't an isolated case. She already knew. Patterns are emerging, he continued. Abuse framed as tradition, authority unchecked, talent lost because it didn't fit a narrow image. Someone slid a tablet across the table, data scrolled past, numbers, names, familiar shapes in unfamiliar places. We need oversight, the director said, but more than that, we need presence. Eyes turned to her. Aveline felt the familiar tightening in her chest, not fear, reluctance. You want me visible, she said. We want you real, he replied. Not a memo, not a warning, a standard. She thought of Black Ridge again, of the moment the clippers buzzed to life, of how clarity had followed humiliation, sharp and undeniable. I'll do it, she said. The weeks that followed blurred into movement. Different bases, different climates, the same quiet arrival. She never announced herself, never corrected assumptions, she let them form. And every time, the pattern repeated in small ways. Dismissal, doubt, tests. Not all were cruel, some were simply careless. Others tried to impress her with bravado, unaware of who she was or choosing not to ask. She watched how they treated the quiet ones, the ones with no medals yet, the ones who didn't fit the mold. She intervened sooner now, not immediately, but before damage calcified. Between visits she trained. Not because she needed to prove anything, but because movement kept the past from settling too deeply. Early runs, long swims, time on the range where breath and trigger pull narrowed the world to something manageable. In one facility, a young instructor challenged her openly, questioning her methods in front of others. The room held its breath. She listened, then asked him to walk her through his logic. He did poorly, but earnestly. She corrected him without humiliation, gave credit where it was due. The shift was immediate, respect earned, not demanded. Later he thanked her, awkwardly, honestly. Those moments mattered. Still, there were nights when the quiet pressed too hard. In hotel rooms or temporary quarters, she sat with her thoughts longer than she liked. The shaved head began to grow back unevenly, dark stubble a constant reminder. She considered cutting it again, decided not to. Some reminders were useful. One evening, after a particularly long day, she found a message waiting, handwritten, scanned and forwarded. It was from Jenkins. He wrote about finishing training, about struggling, about not quitting. He didn't thank her directly. He didn't need to. She read it twice, then folded the printout carefully and placed it in her bag. The doubt quieted after that. Not gone, just manageable. Months later, during a review session, someone asked her the question she'd been avoiding. Does it ever get easier? A young analyst said. Watching people fail when they don't think anyone watching. Aveline considered. No, she said, but it gets clearer. How? You stop expecting better without effort, she replied, and you start building systems that make cruelty harder to hide. The analyst nodded slowly, scribbling notes. As the year turned, her role expanded. Less field work, more policy, more distance. She resisted at first, then accepted what she couldn't change. On her last visit before reassignment, she returned to Black Ridge. Not officially, just passing through. The gate looked the same, the yard cleaner, the flags newer. A few recruits ran drills, one stumbled, another helped him up without prompting. Aveline watched from the fence. No one recognized her. That was the point. She turned away before anyone could ask questions. As she walked back toward the waiting vehicle, she felt lighter than she had in a long time, not because the work was done, but because it was finally honest. Dignity, she had learned, wasn't loud. It didn't arrive with announcements or demand recognition. It moved quietly through choices. And it stayed. Why did the quiet feel louder than any battlefield she had ever known? The facility was asleep when Aveline woke. No alarms, no engines, just the low hum of climate control and the faint tick of a clock mounted too high on the wall. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling, letting the weight of the silence press against her chest. This was the part no one warned you about. Not the danger, not the responsibility. The stillness that came after purpose had been fulfilled. She rose slowly, joints stiff in a way they hadn't been when she was younger. Her reflection in the darkened window caught her attention. Her hair had grown back enough to soften the sharpness of her skull, but it was still uneven, still unmistakable. She kept it that way on purpose, a quiet refusal to forget. She dressed without ceremony and stepped outside. Dawn was just beginning to bleed into the horizon, thin light stretching across concrete and steel. Somewhere in the distance, a recruit was running laps alone, breath ragged, determination louder than his footsteps. Aveline watched him pass once, twice, until he disappeared behind a structure. She didn't interrupt. Some lessons needed space. Later that morning, the final briefing waited for her. Not dramatic, not historic, just paperwork, signatures, a handshake from a man who would never fully understand what she had carried, or why she had chosen to carry it. "You've done good work," he said. She nodded. "The work isn't done." He smiled politely, the way people did when they mistook persistence for stubbornness. Her reassignment orders were simple. Advisory role, less travel, more distance from the ground-level grit she trusted. It was a promotion in every technical sense. It felt like a loss. She packed slowly this time. Not because she didn't know how, but because each item carried weight. Boots scuffed from years of use. A folded photograph she rarely looked at. Jenkins' letter, worn soft at the creases. She paused with that one in her hands. Not everyone needed saving. Not everyone wanted it. But some people just needed to be seen once, properly, without mockery, without dismissal. She slid the letter back into her bag. The drive away was quieter than the first. No tension humming beneath the surface. No anticipation of confrontation, just motion. Forward, always forward. At headquarters, days passed in meetings and reviews. Aveline spoke when necessary, listened more often. She learned which voices carried weight and which only echoed it. She chose her battles carefully now. One afternoon, during a policy review, a junior officer spoke up hesitantly. "With respect," he said, "shouldn't we focus on performance metrics instead of feelings?" The room stilled. Aveline looked at him, not unkindly. "Performance is a feeling," she said. "Confidence, safety, trust. Strip those away and see what's left." No one argued. Weeks turned into months. Her presence became less visible but more influential. Training protocols shifted. Reporting channels strengthened. Evaluations began accounting for character, not just output. Quiet changes, durable ones. Still, there were nights when the memories returned uninvited. The clippers. The rain. The laughter that cut deeper than any blade. On those nights, she reminded herself why she had stayed silent then, and why she spoke now. She wasn't there to be admired. She was there to measure truth. One evening, as she prepared to leave the office, she noticed a young woman lingering near the exit. Fresh uniform, nervous posture, familiar energy. "Ma'am," the woman said, "I was told to give you this." She handed over a folder. Inside was a request for reassignment, a complaint filed properly, calmly, without fear. Aveline read it once, then again. "You did this the right way," she said, meeting the woman's eyes. The relief was immediate, visible. "Thank you," the woman whispered. After she left, Aveline sat for a long time, staring at the empty chair across from her desk. This was why it mattered. Not the reveals, not the authority. The moments where someone chose dignity, because they believed it would be protected. On her last day before extended leave, Aveline returned to the training yard one final time, not in uniform, not as command, just as herself. Recruits ran drills under a clear sky. Orders were sharp but measured, corrections given without cruelty. A young instructor laughed with his unit, the sound unforced. No one recognized her. She smiled faintly. As she turned to leave, a gust of wind brushed against her scalp, cool and familiar. She paused, hand lifting instinctively, then falling again. Some marks weren't meant to fade. They were meant to remind. She walked away without looking back. Because strength didn't need witnesses. Because resilience didn't announce itself. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person could do was endure quietly, then change the world without asking for credit. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.